So hopefully you can all see my screen now. So like I mentioned today, we're going to be covering lesson 9 and lesson 10. So lesson 9 will look into you're going to be looking to working with macros and working with data and the macros. Okay, so we're going to look into importing data from files such as CSV files or databases. We're going to look into sorting the data, filtering our data, and setting up the data in the tables as well. We'll also look into creating macros as well, and towards the end of the lesson as well. So that's essentially what we're going to be covering in today's session. Okay, so most of the exercises in this lesson use the data tab, which you can find at the top here. So where it says data, so we'll be using most of the command groups from this tab here. It's often convenient to store records and perform calculations in the same program, so Excel makes it easy to import existing data from other sources. You can arrange and manage that data properly once you bring it into your workbook, okay? So the first thing that we're going to do is we're going to look into importing data. So when working with larger workbooks, it's helpful if some of the data already exists in some form and can be reused or imported rather than having to type everything in manually. So if the data you need for a workbook is from a source outside of Excel, Excel needs to import that data in such a way that it can make sense of that data. So what we're going to do is, first thing we're going to do, we're going to look into importing data. Now, Excel has two main data formats. So as you can see here, it has an older format, which is with the XLS extension, and has a newer XML-based .xl SX format with specifications that have already been shared publicly. So because the newer format is public, therefore there are more programs and services that now publish data to a format that Excel also accepts. Okay, so .txt or the .csv, so comma separated value files, could be imported and use certain characters such as commas or quotation marks, also known as delimiters, and Excel will not import it will not essentially interpret that part of the set entry. Okay, so let's look into importing a CSV file. So CSV stands for comma separated values. So the first thing that we're going to go do is we're going to go into the data tab here. And here, where it says the get and transform command group, we're going to click where it says new query. And from these options here, we're going to select from a file. And then once you click on that, you'll get presented with more options. So here is the types of files that we can import. So in our case, we will want to import a CSV file. So if we simply click on that, if my Excel doesn't crash. Okay, so yeah, so and then we can go to lesson 9, locate the CSV file for that, which is called 09 na-pop-est. So this is our CSV file that we want to import. And if you hover over that, it also says Microsoft Excel, comma separated values file. Okay, so this is a CSV that we are going to import here. And double click on that to import it. And it might take a few seconds to import it. So Excel analyzes the structure of the import file and displays a window, which you can see here, with import settings applied to the data. Ensure that the delimiter setting at the top of the window is this window displays comma. So ensure that here we have selected comma. If necessary, choose comma from the delimiter drop-down list. Okay, so here is the CSV file that we're going to import, and to import it into our workbook here, we can simply click load, and that will import that data for us. So now So yeah, now we can see that all of that data from that CSV file has been imported into our workbook, okay? And from here, we can go ahead and just like a normal table, we can, do whatever we want really to that table, such as, adjusting the width of the columns and etc. We can also apply formatting to these columns as well. So for example, here we have some residential population values. So here, for example, if we want to format these cells as well, we can simply highlight them, go to the Home tab, and we can, for example, here, maybe we want to add a thousands separator. So here it will format those cells for us. So it works as the same as, working with a normal table, but here we've imported our CSV file. We can also look into getting, looking to get external data. So in the world of computers, there are data files and databases. A data file stores a series of records in a relatively simple format, and Excel uses data files in this manner. You also have databases. So a database is a comparatively complex system that can store large amounts of related data, which requires a program to be able to assess and render the data. So when Excel imports data from a database opposed to a data file, it actually launches a program, begins a communication process with that program, and instructs your program to stream the data it requires. Okay, so now let's look into importing a database. Okay, so same as we did previously, we're going to go into the data tab here, and where it says new query, simply click on that drop down, and instead of clicking on from file, we're going to click from database. Okay, so from here, we want to import, say, a Microsoft Access database. So from here, we can select this one. If you have a SQL Server database, IBM, or some other type of database, you also have the options here as well. So for this example, we're going to import a Microsoft Access database. And in our file, it will recognize that here we have one Microsoft Access database available to us, which we can import. Again, we can select that one and select import. Again, it might take a few seconds just to load up the data. Okay, so same as previously, it's going to present us with a new window that's going to pop up. Now, in this customers database, we have a couple tables here. We have customers table, invoices, product inventory. So for example, say for this customers database, we want to import all of the customers, okay? So we can select the table that we want. So here we're going to go ahead and select the customers table. And again, we're going to click on load. So also on the right here, it will also provide you with a preview of what is in that database. So again, go ahead and click load. And here now we have imported our database from Microsoft. So this is an external database that we've just imported into our Excel workbook. So next thing that we're going to move on to is ensuring your data's integrity. So validation helps ensure that the data gets entered correctly in an Excel worksheet before it gets processed incorrectly. Okay. So Excel's validation tools can help you set up rules that keep you or essentially anyone else from entering invalid or unusable data, or from failing to enter data when it's required. Okay, so for example, we can set up a rule in Excel that displays messages when someone types a 2 or 4-digit area code instead of a required 3-digit area code. Okay, and the user may then respond by dismissing this message and starting over again. Okay, so now let's have a look at data validation. Okay, so we're going to go ahead and open. So we can close this one. So close our current workbook, don't save it. And we're going to go ahead and open 09. If we browse for it in lesson 9, it's called 09 Vet Clinic Patients. So vet clinic patients. So this one here. Okay, so this is what you should see. Now, first thing that we're going to do, so if you remember from previous sessions, we can freeze certain rows. So we're going to select row 5. We're going to go into sorry, view, and we're going to freeze um, the first 4 rows. Okay, so this makes it simple for when we're scrolling down, we can still see the labels of these columns. Okay, so here we're going to look into data validation. So if we select column, let's select column H. Okay, so here in this column we have a bunch of area codes for each input, each client here. So for this, what we're going to do is we're going to select column H, and we're going to go to the data tab. From here, we will go to the data tools command group, and here you will see an option that says data validation. So if you click on that, and it will pop up a dialog box. Okay, so from this, what we're going to do is from this drop down, we're going to select text length. So this is what we want to validate for. Okay, so the text length. Okay, and it's going to ask us what range do we want it to be between. So between, equal to, greater than, or something else. So here we're going to say that this area code, the length of this area code needs to be set to a specific length. Okay, and the length that we can specify here could be, for example, 3. Okay, we can then go into the error alert, and we can also display a little error message for if the user doesn't input 3. Okay, so for example here we could say the title rule, and for the error message we can say that please enter a 3-digit area code. Okay, so this is what the user will get prompted if they don't enter a 3-digit code. Again, from here you can select the style to be a stop, a warning, or information. Okay, so let's go ahead and apply this to this column. Now you'll notice here that all of these values in this column are already 3 digits. But say, for example, I want to enter an area code, by accident I enter a, I don't know, a 4-digit area code. Okay, so 1573. Okay, so if you remember previously, we set the text length to 3, so it should only be equal to 3. Okay, and if I click OK now, it won't let me enter that data into that cell because it does not allow me to, because we what we did with the data validation, and like we entered previously into the error message dialog box here, it's going to also prompt us with a error message that says please enter a 3-digit area code, and it's going to enable us to do it again. So here if we do it properly this time, and if we do, for example, 123, it is fine, the text length is 3 and we don't get an error for it. Okay, now let's move on to the next thing. So allowing only specific type of values to be entered into cells. So a typical piece of information you need to find in a database is often a single letter that represents a character, such as a political party affiliation or the work shift, or to which one is assigned. So in data entry, it's easy for someone to slip and enter an invalid character. So this is, essentially, why you would enter and you would format and integrate data validation into your table, so that, for example, if you're sharing your, for example, worksheet or workbook with other people, you don't want them to, be entering the wrong, or by accident entering the wrong kind of information, whether that's, the area code or someone's name or something. So, or email or phone number, or again, this could be a great example to use it with phone numbers that have a specific length. So this is to ensure that, the entered phone number is at the required length. Okay, so now let's look into only allowing only specific values to be entered into cells. Okay, so what we're going to do is, if we select column, let's select column C from here, and again if we go to the data tab and click where it says data validation, go back to settings, and here instead of selecting text length, we're going to select list. Okay, and from the list, in the source box, we're going to select and type in M the comma, then F, then a comma, then N, okay? And we're gonna uncheck where it says ignore blank. And for the input message, we're gonna say, you can type in male, female, and what we're going to do is we're going to select OK. And if you notice here, for what we just did for the data validation, so the input message will appear here, male, female, and we will also get presented with a drop down that enables us to select from what options we provided, so M, F, or N. So this also um, means that, for example, if someone is filling in your form, they just don't go and, for example, type, some random letters into here. They'll have to select from these options that is given to them. Okay, so this might be, for example, for like a gender column where you're like saying if someone is a male or female. So this is to ensure that you don't get any type of other data inputted in that column that's in your table. Okay, so now let's go to the patients list worksheet, and here you will select column E, which is the owners column. Again, we can go into data validation, and from the settings, we're going to go and select list again. Yep, and then from that list, we're going to click where it says the source dialog box. So this is where the source dialog box is. So here we're not going to enter something. What we're going to do is we're going to click on this arrow here, and it will minimize our dialog box. And what we're going to do is we're going to go into the client list, and also please pay attention to here while I'm doing this. So as I'm clicking, this will get updated here as well. Okay, so I'm going to click on the client list worksheet, and then I'm going to select column A. So you'll see client list and then $A, comma $A. Okay, and then we can again expand our dialog box, and here from the error alert, we're going to select the warning. And for the error message, we're going to say owner must be the number from a pre-existing client. And what we're going to do is we're going to click OK. And again, you'll notice that the drop down arrow will appear for that column that we applied the data validation to. Okay, so here what it's going to present us is with all the clients that are available to us from this column that we selected previously. Okay, so this is ensure that if we're linking up certain values and columns to another worksheet, that, for example, if here you need to assign the owner to it, for example, if a specific owner needs to be assigned to this, for example, owner 38, we can select that from the drop down. This also is another way of only allowing specific values to be entered into cells. So this means that, for example, I can't just go in and type in a random number into this cell. It needs to be selected from that drop down, which was linked to the column of the IDs of the owners in the next the clients list worksheet. Okay, and again, it's going to provide us with a warning like we set it before, and with the error message that we also set as well. Okay. We can also look into removing duplicates from worksheets as well. So this is quite useful if you're trying to only look for the unique rows of data in your worksheet. So what, for example, for this example, what we're going to do is we're going to copy this last column. Exactly, okay. Well, actually, let's do it on this one here. So what we're going to do is we're going to copy this last column. So here in this table, these last two columns are exactly the same, so they're duplicates, okay? But let's, for example, for this one, let's change the ID, client ID to 0053. Okay, so the only thing that's different here is the ID. Okay, but apart from that, everything else in these rows are exactly the same. Okay, so to remove duplicates, what we can do is we can select A4 from A4, so include the title headers as well, and drag it all the way down to the bottom. So we're going to highlight all of our data. And from the data tools command group here, you'll see an option that says remove duplicates. Okay, so if we click on that, it's going to pop up a dialog box again, and it's going to give us some options. Okay, so here it's going to ask us which columns do we want to include. So for example, in this case, since I changed the ID and the ID is unique, I'm going to ignore that. I'm going to ignore that column. Okay, so again, if we highlight it, click where it says remove duplicates, and let's untick this one. But in terms of the other columns, we're going to check and make sure that there's no duplicates. Okay, so if we select OK, it's going to say that one duplicate value was found and removed. 52 unique values still remain. Okay, and if we click OK and go all the way back to the bottom, you'll notice that it removed the duplicate row that we entered previously. Okay, so in many databases, it's important that each record, similar to a row in Excel database, is unique. If an entry appears twice, Excel might treat the record as a separate entries, even though they contain identical information. The difficulty then comes when you try to reconcile any other records or subsequent data that might refer to either of these duplicate entries. So you can have Excel search for duplicate entries and purge them. So like I just showed you here. And you can do that through the data tools command group and through where it says remove duplicates. So sorting data. So sorting a data range in Excel helps you locate the precise data you need. For example, you might want to sort customers in a table by their last name rather than an arbitrary customer number you won't remember. Okay. So when you enter a new customer, you might find it's easier to enter the name at the bottom of the list and then resort the data table alphabetically. This way, you don't have to manually insert a blank row in the middle of the table, in the middle of a worksheet, and the appropriate alphabetical location. Okay, so when it comes to sorting, you've probably heard of the word criteria. More often, it's a singular form criterion. Both words relate elements that are referred to in a course of executing a function. For instance, the white page has three sort criterion: first name, last name, and middle initial. When individuals in a database are indexed by a number, the number is guaranteed to be unique in the forms of a single criterion for a common sort operation. Okay, so now let's look into actually sorting data on a single criteria. Okay, so in the patients list, we can click on the patients worksheets here, and let's select E5. Okay, here. And what we can do is we can sort this data. So on the data tab, if we go on the data tab, you'll notice a command group here that says sort and filter. So what we can do is there's some options here. So we can sort from smallest to largest or largest to smallest. So if we sort from smallest to largest, you'll notice that every single value in this column has now been sorted for us. So if I just undo that for you, again, we go to sort and filter, and we can select on either one of these. So if we do this one, it will sort from largest to smallest, and this one will sort from smallest to largest. Okay. So that's how you would sort data in your tables. So a proper database containing records of people divides each element of the name into at least, very least, the last and first names, and you might want to include optional elements such as middle initials, prefixes, and suffixes. For this reason, anytime you sort a database range or table by names, you want to sort by multiple criteria. Okay, so what we just did was we essentially sorted this data by one criteria. Okay, and that was either sorting from smallest to largest or largest to smallest. Now let's look into sorting that data in using multiple criteria. Okay, so what we're going to do is we're going to select for this one, we're going to select range, the entire range of this table, which is A4 to N56. So we're going to A4 to E56, sorry. And what we're going to do is, actually, let's do it on the client. So A4 to all the way to I56. So we've selected that entire range, okay? Now what we're going to do is, again, we're going to go back to this command group here, and instead of selecting these two, we're going to select where it says sort, okay? And you'll notice an additional dialog box will appear, okay? So this will allow us to add levels to our sorting, okay? So what we can do is, for example, it's going to say sort by, and for this one, we're going to sort by the last name first, okay? In order of A to Z. And then we can add another level to this by clicking on this button here. And then it says sort by last name, then by, for example, first name. And then we can add another layer to that and sort by, for example, MI. So it's going to sort the data in that table by those things that we just specified. So it's going to sort by last name, then first name, then MI. Okay, so these are, instead of having, one criteria, here we have multiple criteria that we're sorting against, okay? And simply if we click OK, if you pay attention to this table, you will notice that the client list is now sorted alphabetically with people sharing the same last name sorted alphabetically by first name. Although the client number appears all out of order, as you can see here, this data is unchanged and the database itself remains in its full integrity, okay? So you can either, like I showed you, sort using one criteria, or if you have multiple criteria, you can sort against multiple criteria. So sorting data using cell attributes. So Excel can sort records based on conditional formatting that applies to its cells. So if you remember in one of the previous sessions, we looked into conditional formatting. So Excel does not have a conditional sort feature where you create a rule or a formula that Excel evaluates to group or arrange rows. Rather, you create rules that specify that apply specific formats or graphics to cells based on their contents. Okay, so let's look into doing this as well. So this is with conditional formatting. Okay, so if we go on the patients list worksheet again from here, and let's select column. Let's select column D. Okay, let's go to data validation. Let's make sure that we don't have any data validation applied here. And what we're going to do is, actually, let's do something else. So let's add an additional column, okay? So let's add a additional column that says and in this column, what we're going to do is we're going to just enter some random data in. So for example, S or N, okay? So N. Okay, so here we've added an additional column here, and we've inputted some data into this as well. So we have S or N as our values. So what we can do is we can select this column again, click where it says data validation, go into the data validation setting, and here under the settings, we're going to choose a list. In our source box, because we specified either S or N here, we can also type in S or N here as well, okay? So capital N, comma S, and please ensure that if you're doing this yourself, you do enter this comma in as well, okay? It's important. Now in the input message, we can just type in S is equal to and N is equal to and click OK. Okay. So this is what we did this essentially before. We did some data validation. So now again from here we can select one of these. Now let's select our range. Okay, so we want to apply conditional formatting also to this range as well. Okay, so we're going to select our range. Like how we did before with the conditional formatting, we're going to go into the styles command group on the home tab, and we're going to create a new rule. Okay, here we're going to select this one here, the second option that says format only cells that contain. From the cell value, we're going to select no blanks. Okay, and let's change the color for this as well so we can see it. So let's set this to green. So yeah, sorry, select no blanks for here. And then here, what we're going to do is we're going to click OK. So you'll notice that now our conditional formatting has been applied here as well. Okay. So what we can do is also with this conditional formatting, I remember someone asking me this in the previous session, if you can do it, for example, for letters as well. So what you would do is, for example, if you go into conditional formatting, if you click manage rules, and if we select edit this rule, instead of selecting no blanks, if you want to do conditional formatting against some sort of text, from here you will select specific text, okay? And we're going to say if this cell contains, for example, N, format it to be blue, and click OK, and let's create a new rule. And then specific text again, and let's say for S, we're also going to do it for S, and it's going to be yellow, okay? And what we can do is, if you pay attention again to here, if we click apply, you will notice that it will apply conditional formatting to those text based on the conditional formatting rules that we set. Okay, so this is how you would do it against certain text. Okay, so I remember someone asked me this in the previous session. But in the previous session, we only looked into applying it against formulas and numerical values. Okay. So once we've applied conditional formatting as well, so we applied data validation first and conditional formatting, we can then go into sorting the data using cell attributes. Okay, so what we're going to do is we're going to select this range here, and once we've selected this range, we're going to go into the data tab, and here where it says sort and filter, we are going to essentially sort this data. Okay, so what we do is we click sort, and filter, sorry. And what we can do is here we can sort everything by color as well. Okay, so essentially, if you can, I do this again for you. If we highlight this column again, so we're going to apply some filters to this column. Okay, what we can do is select filter, and it will apply a little again drop down arrow here again, and this will provide us with some filter options. Okay, so from here, if we want to filter some rows by the color that we specified in our conditional formatting, we can also do that as well, and that will then again filter based on the conditional formatting colors that we specified. Okay, so this is how you would do that. Again, that's going to be changing the data and displaying what we want to see based on the conditional formatting that we applied. So filtering data. So with any database, you can just make a request or query to just record meets criteria. So you expect to see only relevant data, and for irrelevant or non-matchy data, you want that data to be filtered out. So with Excel, we can filter just those rows that don't pertain or what you are searching for. So this does not change the database. Essentially, what you're doing is just filtering and looking at what you want to. It's not going to be deleting anything. Okay, so it's not going to be deleting any rows with when you apply those filters. So We can do that using autofilter. So autofilter is the quickest means for you to set up a table so that it displays only rows that meet simple criteria. There are ways that you can set up complex advanced filters, but here we're going to look into autofilter. And autofilter essentially converts the headings of your rows into a set of controls which you can then use to choose your criteria and select the data that you want to see. Okay, so let's go to the clients list here again. And to apply and use autofilter, what you can do is you will select from A4. So we want to include the titles as well for our columns. And we're going to select the entire range and the entire table all the way down to I56. And here at the top where it says sort and filter, we're going to select filter. And if you pay attention to this darker blue row here that has the titles of our columns, once I click on filter, you will see some arrows, drop down arrows appear here as well. Okay. So from here, we can then go and essentially filter out what any kind of data and look for any kind of data that we're looking for. So say, for example, I'm looking for, um, only people that are located in Pennsylvania. So again, I can select where it says city, click on the drop down for that. I can then select what kind of what I'm looking for essentially here. And for example, if I deselect all of them and select Pennsylvania and select OK, then it's going to only showing me the Pennsylvania results. Okay, so it's going to display only where the city is set to Pennsylvania. Again, also you will notice that once you apply a filter, unlike these ones that have a drop down arrow pointing downwards, once you apply a filter, you'll see a little filter icon appear here as well. So that indicates that this column has some sort of filter applied to it. Again, we can go ahead and change this. We can look for multiple and filter for multiple things. So this will only select and display Indiana, Blade City, and Cincinnati. Okay. We can also sort our data as well. Again, if we click on this, for example, where it says client ID, if we click on the drop down, we can again sort from smallest to largest. And for example, let's sort from smallest to largest. And once you sort that, you will notice again this data has multiple filters applied to it. So we've applied filters to the city and where it says client ID as well. And if you pay attention, hopefully you can see it where it says where we applied the smallest to largest client filter, smallest to largest or largest to smallest, instead of a filter icon, you will see a little arrow pointing upwards. Okay, so if we sort from largest to smallest, it will show us an arrow pointing downwards. Okay, so that's how you can tell if you're sorting from smallest to largest or you've applied some sort of filter here. So these icons in these boxes will change that and indicate to you that here you've actually applied some sort of filter. So if you're looking at, for example, someone else's work, or someone else's work, but you can tell, for example, which columns that they have filtered out. Again, to remove the filter, we can quickly do that by selecting where it says clear filter from city, and that's going to get rid of that filter for us as well. So moving on to the next topic, which is outlining and subtotaling data. So worksheets also serve as list of values and their related descriptions. So descriptive categories help us subdivide data into groups. Excel can then collapse those groups into single row headings called outlines. So Excel uses outlines to generate reports that you provide with meaningful data about the items in each group collectively. So the most important of these reports show you subtotals for the values that are grouped together. Okay, so grouping or and ungrouping. So here you will notice in this data tab, you have a command group called outline, like I just mentioned. And here in this command group, we have an option called group, ungroup, and subtotal. So the simplest form of data grouping involves taking a row of cells that have one related attribute, clustering them together, and then collapsing the cluster like a folder that can be reopened later. So this reduces the size of long reports to make them easier to read. So grouping data is best reserved for final reports and not for active databases where the new data might be entered and updated as you go along. Okay. So whenever you group rows together or perform an operation in which groups are automatically created, Excel adds controls next to those rows and column headings. So let's have a look at this. So let's look into grouping some data here. So say, for example, I want to group all of the contents in this table so that it only shows me these four first rows. Okay, so what we can do is we select from A5, select row 5 all the way to the last row, row 56. Okay, and what we can do is we can go to the outline group, and here we can select group, and straight away you will notice that we have a little pane appear here which says 1, 2, and if we go down, we have a little line here that comes down, and we have like a minus box in a box. Okay, so essentially this has now grouped that entire range that we selected, and if we click where it says minus in this box, it will then collapse and hide all of that data for us. So, okay, so all of that data range that we selected that was grouped, we can select this to view or unview it. So that's how you would group data. Again, you can do a similar thing with your columns as well. So for example, if we want to group these two columns, we can highlight them and simply click group. And again, you will notice a little line here appear with a minus sign in that box. And again, if we click on this, it's gonna display that data if we want it to. So it's quite useful to do that if you're grouping data. And but like I mentioned previously, you wouldn't really want to be doing this if you are going to be adding more columns to this, for example, this worksheet still. So you only want to be doing this if it's the final version, because for example, if it is not for the final version and you say you do add extra columns to this worksheet, and you want it to, for example, hide from H to N, it won't do that unless you undo this process and group that range. So essentially, if we just do that, it will still remain the same. Okay, so that's why you would essentially be using this really when in your worksheet or workbook is in its final stages or final form. To ungroup data or columns or rows, again, we can simply select those columns that we selected to group previously. And if we click ungroup here, we can ungroup those rows as well, and that will get rid of the grouping for us. It's the same way that we did it for this one. If we select that entire range and click ungroup, it will ungroup that range of rows for us as well. So in the upper left corner are the number buttons that let you show or hide all of the group's contents for a particular level. Okay, so when you have two groups that are beside each other, you have two levels. Okay, so let's take a look at this. So let's say we want to hide from here to here, so column D to column I. If we group this, now we've grouped that entire column, and if we click on this again, it will get rid of, and we can no longer see it. It does not delete it, it simply just hides that data for us. So here we can have multiple levels of grouping as well. So what we can do is we can, so we grouped from A, D to I. We can also, for example, group in that group another group. Okay, so for example, G to H, if we click group, you will see that now we have multiple levels to our grouping. And as you can see here, we have 1, 2, or 3. And if we select on 1 or 2 or 3, it will again ungroup or group that data for us. So there's multiple layers that you can do to this if you wish to. It's not just that you can only group, for one layer. There's multiple layers that you can do it for. Okay, so next moving on to auto outlining data. So for a complex report, such as a balance sheet with assets and liabilities broken down into departments and subdepartments, grouping data can be tedious. Suppose you inserted the total value cells along the bottom rows of related cells or along the right column beside related cells, or perhaps both. You probably need to do this in a formal balance sheet or from a table with names of salespeople in rows and sales for days of the week in columns. So Excel can detect the when and why you set up your worksheet like this. So when you auto outline a table or a worksheet for the tables, it creates the group automatically. Okay, so let's look into actually doing this and how this works. So if we open '09 critical care expenses, okay, and you should see something like this. Now if we click on the now let's select ranges B6 all the way to H24. Okay, so let's select this entire range, and what we can do is, again, if we go to the data tab, you will see that here, if we again go to the outline command group and click group, it's going to pop up with a dialog box. Here we're going to group the rows. Okay, so you should see the rows grouping appear on the rows, and if we click OK, you'll see that those rows have been grouped. Okay. Now to apply the auto outlining, what you can do is, again, if we select that entire range again, if we click on this drop down that says groups, so previously we selected where it said group, if we select auto outline, what it will do is, if you remember previously, it grouped that entire range. What it's done here is that it's automatically picked up that there's two different tables here, okay? And essentially what it's done is it's grouped them individually. So now if we minimize this, you will see that it will minimize the range of data in that table, and similarly the same for this one. Okay, so this is a great example of grouping. So for example, if you look at this table here, it says that, for example, these are our daily expenses, for example, and if we collapse this and open this grouping, we can see a more detailed view of what our expenses are for each item. Okay, so this version here provides a quick overview of our daily expenses, and if we expand our group, it will provide a more detailed view of what these expenses are, for example, for mileage, meals, supplies, and etc. So this is a great example of how you would do grouping and how you can use auto outline in grouping as well. Here also, again, if we collapse these as well. So here we can also, if you remember previously, in the previous sessions where we looked into using formulas, here we can also use AutoSum. So AutoSum is really handy. So if we go to the Formulas tab, and if we select AutoSum, it's going to automatically pick up that we want to make a sum of these values in this column, okay? And simply click OK, and it does it straight away for us. Again, same thing, if we click type in equal, or if we just click AutoSum in this cell, again, it's going to pick up that we want to make a sum of the cells in this column. Okay, so now our data looks very clean, and we can minimize or expand depending on how much detail we want to see these tables in. Okay, so now let's move on to subtotaling data in outlines. So suppose a worksheet say serves as a report of certain activity that a place or given days with respect to specific divisions of the company. So there are three categories represent this level of information. So when you sort a worksheet so that these levels are in a precise order, Excel accepts each of these levels as tiers in the outline. So an outline gives you the complete summary, hiding the details until you request them. Okay, so let's look into how you would implement subtotal data in outlines. So if we click close these previous workbooks that we had, and if we click and open O9 server usage stats, so O9 server usage stats, okay, and you should see something like this. Okay, so what we can do is if we select this entire range from A6 all the way down to G141, so we've selected the entire table here. If we go to the data tab again, so we're currently on the data tab, and if we select where it says sort, here we can sort again by, for example, anything that we want. So for example, date, oldest to newest, and click OK, and it will sort these dates from the oldest to the newest. Okay. Again, if we select that entire range again, so once we select that entire range again, if we go into the outline command group, you'll see something here that says subtotal. Okay. So subtotal quickly calculates rows of related data by inserting subtotals and totals. Okay, so if we click on this now, it's going to ask us, it's going to pop up with a dialog box. And for here in this one, we're going to add subtotals to average bandwidth, data in, data out, and transactions. So we're going to add subtotals for these four options. And we're going to select where it says check the replace current subtotals. Okay, so make sure that one's checked as well. And if we click OK, you'll notice that here now it's also done a subtotal of that of each month for us. Okay, so here previously we didn't have this. Okay, but now it's added these extra rows at the end of each month where it's done the subtotal for us. Again, if you look previously, if you look again, if you pay attention now, at this point, none of this, at no point in this data there are subtotals. So again, if we click on subtotal, select whatever we want to subtotal, and if we click OK, you will notice that straight away it'll do a subtotal at the end of each month. 15th of July total, 22nd of July total, based on what options we selected in that dialog box. And it was also grouped that data for us as well. Okay, so for example, if I don't want to look at the July data, I can simply just hide it, or the July 8th data. So here you can really select and display whatever kind of data that you want to. Okay, so from here, for example, I might want to look at the 22nd of July, and here it will display that data for that range. Okay, so that's how the subtotaling works in Excel. Okay, so now let's move on to the next topic, which is defining a title for a table. Okay, so the one big difference between tables and an ordinary data range is that the table can give you can be given a title so that the table it's and the columns itself can be referred to by name instead of reference locations. So once the table is given a title, all the names of its column can be used in place of the cell reference in a formula. Okay, so let's have a look at this. So if we close this now, and if we open Excel workbook that is called O9 Pet Parma, O9 Pet Parma Sales, should be this one. Okay, and you should see something like this. Okay, so first things first is we want to turn this into a table. So you might think it already looks like a table, but we're going to turn it into a table. You will notice why. So for example, if I click anywhere in these cells here, you'll see that we don't have an additional tab pop up here. But if we convert this into a table, doing it this way, so if we highlight that range, go to home, format as table, and if we select one of these, you'll notice also the filter options also get applied here as well. Okay, so now once I click in one of these cells here, you will see an additional table design tab show up. Okay, now from here we can specify the name of our table. Okay, so from here we might want to specify the name of this table to be drug sales. Okay, and press enter. So now we've named this entire table drug sales. Okay, and what we can do is, if you go all the way down to the end of this table here where it says total sales, you will notice that it's currently working out the sum of the total sales by doing equals sum and then a selected range. Okay, so what we can do is we can say equals sum, and if you remember, we named our table drug sales. Okay, so if we just type in the R, you'll notice that drug sales also pops up, which is what we named our table. Okay, and then once we've pressed tab, we select a square bracket, and once you select that square bracket, you will notice that actually it's displaying all the names of these columns that we can select from. So we've specified the name of the table that we want to go into. Now we're going to specify the columns that we want to sum. Okay, so for example, if we want to sum all of the values in total sales, so if we want to sum all the values in this column, what we can do is, once we specify the table name, we can type in total sales, and we'll see that this option will appear here. And now what it's going to do is going to do a sum of the total sales in the drug sales table that we defined. Okay, so to finish this off, we do a square brackets to close it and a close parentheses and click enter. And again, it's showing the same sum, but now we've changed the way it's calculating it. It's making reference to our drugs sales table that we defined, and it's looking into this total sales column. Okay, so say for example, again, if you pay attention to these ones, this value here is 157,000, and this one is 126,000. Again, these are the formulas for them. So let's look into using equals sum if. Okay, and now again we're going to go into the drugs sales table. Again, we're going to do open square brackets, and we're going to look into the to treat column. Okay, close the brackets and comma. So after that comma, we're going to looking for equals sum if tab drug sales, sorry. And then here again we're going to go into the to treat column, tab, square brackets, comma, and here we're going to look for all the values that are dogs. So dog. So you will notice here we have dogs, cats, or dogs or cats. So here we're only looking for dogs, as what we're trying to calculate here is sales of dog only products. Okay, so we're looking for dogs. Again, close that quotation mark and comma, and we're gonna do drug sales, yep, drug sales again. And you will notice that this table now gets again highlighted again, and we're gonna look for the total sales. Okay, So we're looking for the total sales of the dog products, okay? So again, simply type in total sales, tab, brackets close, and you will notice that it's highlighted now these two columns. So it's looking for this criteria, and it's only going to be summing the values that have dog as the attribute, okay? So now if we do close parentheses, you'll notice that again, it provides the same value for us, okay? Again, we can do this same thing for the cat one. And to change it for the cat one, what we can do is simply where it says dog, update it and change it to cat. Now it's only going to do the sales of the cat products only, okay? So that's how you would look into using and why you would use and define a title for a table. So it can be quite handy for when you're doing calculations and using certain formulas. So does that make sense so far? Does anyone have any questions? Okay. So guys, if you have any questions at any time, just feel free to ask. Okay. So now let's move on to the next topic, which is using the total row command, okay, in a table. Okay, so to use and add the total row table, here again we can select any cell in this table. So if you pay attention here again, this is quite important in the customize group, and you'll see the table design tab. If I click off that table, it then disappears. So if I go back on it, it will appear again. So to add the total row option here, what we can do is click on the design table design tab, and here where it says table style options command group, here we can select where it says total row, and you will see that it's added a total row for us automatically. Okay, so if I untick it again, it will disappear. If I go on and select it again, it will reappear. And what this does is essentially it provides us with a total row that we can quickly, for example, if I want to work out the max value in the number of cases column, I can select the max or the min, any of these commands here. For example, if I want to for the item prices column, if I want to work out the average, I can again from this drop down, I can select average and work out the average for that entire column for me. Okay, so that's why you would use the total row option and why it can be handy. So essentially, um, it's a row at the end of the table which displays totals for each column. Okay, so it can be quite handy if you're working with a numerical data. And it saves you having time to type in equals sum or whatever, or equals average. It automatically does it for you. Okay, so you can select from any of these, or if you want more functions, you can simply click on more functions. Also as well, you might have noticed that here we also have the filters. So for example, if you filter for a specific thing, so say for example, I want to display only the values for dogs here. If I select dogs and click OK, you will notice that although it's displaying just what I selected, just the criteria, and showing the criteria that I selected, it does not change and update these values. Okay, simply it's hidden the other data and it's just showing me the data based on the criteria I selected. But it's important to note that here it does not update these values based on the filtering that you do here as well. Okay, so you can see here these values also remain the same. Okay, so final thing that a few last two things I want to look into is one of them is the slicer. So there are two ways to filter a table so that it shows only a specified subset of records. One is through autofilter, which we looked into previously, and another is through the slicer. Okay, so this panel includes buttons labeled with each of the contents of the columns in the table. So when you click a button, the table is filtered to show only rows that match the selection. Okay, so let's look into doing this. So if we click on any cell inside this table, click where it says data, and click where it says so in the sorter and filter group, make sure that we don't have any filters applied. Now, if we go back to the table design tab, you will see here in the tools command group an option that says insert slicer. Okay, so if we click on that, it's going to ask us to what do we want to insert a slicer for. Okay, so here we're going to select for example, for use on and to treat, and if we click OK, you'll notice that two little boxes will appear. And from here, we can essentially filter out whatever we want in our table, okay? So if we move these two boxes here, you'll notice that here, I can filter out all the cats. And as you can see, it shows all the cats, okay? Or for example, if I want to filter out, for example, for use on allergies, again, it will filter out for use on allergies, okay? So this is a different way of doing it, and it's called slice using the slicer. So there's different ways of doing it. You can use autofilter or slicer. This is a different, it just provides different, user interface for you to do your filtering, okay? So let's move on. And you can simply just delete them by clicking on them and then just clicking on delete. So final topic for this in this lesson is macros. So macros are quite useful. So a basic macro is a recording of sequence of commands and typed entries that you can then replace somewhere else in the worksheet. Okay. So say for example, if we look into, let's first copy this August sales worksheet here. So here we have two copies of it. So a macro, a recorded macro is a series of steps that can be repeated, and you might want to repeat frequently to save time. So this is something that you would do if you were trying to, save time. So for example, now let's look into doing this. So in order for you to be able to use and implement macros, first thing you need to do, you need to click on options. Here in the customize ribbon, you need to select the customize ribbon tab. And from here, by default, you'll see that your developer option is unticked. So what you want to do is you want to tick the developer one and click OK. Okay. And once you've done that, you'll see a developer tab appear at the top of here as well. Okay. So what we're going to do is we're going to record a macro, which is going to be a sequence of steps. It's going to record all of our steps that we do, and then we can use this macro later on whenever we want to apply elsewhere in our workbook. Okay. So to record a macro, what we're going to do is we can select where it says record macro, and here you'll see an also option that says macros. So here, if you have created any previous macros, they will be listed here. Okay. So what we're going to do is we're going to record a macro. It's going to ask us to provide it with a name. So let's say apply styling. Okay. So this macro that I'm doing right now will apply some sort of styling to size to worksheet. Okay. You can give it a name. You can give it a description. Okay. And if you also want, you can also specify a shortcut key to launch this macro as well. Okay. So if we click OK, here you will now see that it says stop recording. So now whatever we do after this point, whatever we click, it will detect that, it will pick up that, and it will record that. Okay, so say for example, I want to change the color of this background here. So remember, it's the macro is still recording. Okay, so what we're going to do is we're going to change the background here. Let's also change the font to bold, and I don't like the font on this, so I'm going to change it to something else. Here, what we're going to do is we are going to again change the color of this to orange, and I'm going to also change the font here, change the font color to purple, and let's leave it bold. Okay, so you'll notice here I changed some of this, the styling of this current worksheet that we're on. Now if we go back to the developer and if we click stop recording, now if we click on where it says macros, you'll notice that our macro that we created has been created. Okay, and we can also run it from here as well. Okay, so what we're going to do is, first thing that we're going to do is when you are working with macros, in order for your macros to work, you also need to save your Excel worksheet as a macro enabled workbook. Okay, so to do this, you click File, Save As, Browse, and let's browse and save this on my desktop. So give it a name, and then from the file type here, you want to select macro enabled workbook. Okay, this is so that the macros work. If you don't do this, they just simply won't work. Okay, so you need to save it as a macro enabled workbook and click Save. So it will pop up with a warning message again. Just be careful. Parts of the document may contain personal information that can't be recovered by the document inspector. Click OK. And now we've saved this workbook as a macro-enabled workbook. Okay. And what we can do is we can now apply this macro to anything that we want, any worksheet that we want. So if you remember previously, I copied this August sales worksheet here as well. So for reference, now you notice here, this one has our previous styling that we had originally. So what I can do is I can simply click on macro. And if you pay attention to here, remember that in the August sales one, we applied styling here. So if we go back to this worksheet, and if we select our applying styling macro, and if we click run, you'll notice that it automatically applies that styling for us based on the steps that it recorded while I was recording that macro. Okay, so instead of me having to go on every single worksheet and do the styling manually, I can just use that macro every single time I want and apply that styling really quickly by just simply running that macro. So that's how macros would work. You would need to really be using them if you're trying to save time on doing repetitive tasks. So yeah. So that's how macros work. So they're really handy and very important to remember that you save it as a macro enabled workbook as well. So does anyone have any questions on macros?
Hi, Sasan.
Hello.
Is there anything else we can apply other than styling?
Oh, you can do anything. You can do so with macros. It's a great question. So I just showed you a very basic example, very simple example with macros, because when you start recording a macro, it records everything that you do, literally everything. So for example, if you also you can also do apply formulas in that macro, so it does calculations for you as well automatically upon like running that macro. So it's anything that you do and anything that you record, it will be recorded in that macro. So you can do summing specific columns or applying certain formulas. So it's not just limited to styling. I just did the styling one just as a demonstration, as a simple demonstration. But again, because once you run a macro, it records all your steps. You can pretty much apply anything and it will record that, and you can then use that macro later on to apply that to a different worksheet that we wish to.
Okay, thank you.
You're welcome. And does anyone else have any questions? Guys, if you have any other questions, feel free to ask before we move on. So if we look into here, essentially, if I just close this again, if we click on macros and select this applying styling one, and if we click step info, you'll notice that it's picked up every single step that I have done. For example, changing the font to Arial, changing the color, changing the styling, changing the font to bold. So it's picked up all of my actions that I have done while I was recording that macro. So again, like I mentioned previously, it doesn't just limit it to styling. You can do anything that you record during that record of that macro. It will be saved. All those steps will be saved as well. Okay, guys, so let's take a 10-minute break or 15-minute break till 5 minutes past 5, and then we will go ahead and start with the next lesson. So in this lesson, we looked into importing data, sorting out data, filtering the data, outlining and subtotaling, and setting up data in a table, and how to use macros. Okay, again, exactly what I've just gone through. There's also step by steps of everything on how to, for example, record a macro, naming it. There's plenty of exercises for everything that I've gone through. Again, what I went through previously using, defining a title for a table. So please ensure that you go through these exercises, as it's good practice and it will be helpful for your Microsoft certification exam. So that is it, guys. So we will be back at 5:05. So we'll take a 15-minute break till 5:05, and then we'll start with lesson 10, which is using advanced formulas.